أهلا بكم مشاهدينا في هذا اللقاء الخاص على سكاي نيوز عربية، ونستضيف فيه وكيل الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة للشؤون الإنسانية مارتن غريفيث.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
أهلا بك معنا. يعني طبيعة الحال سأنطلق من غزة والوضع في غزة خاصة مع التوجه نحو رفح وما يحدث. يعني يبدو وكأننا عدنا للمربع الأول وبدايات الحرب، حيث المعارك في مختلف المحاور داخل القطاع، وحيث أيضا عدنا لمسألة وضع العقبات أمام المساعدات الإنسانية والمعابر البرية على الخصوص من قبل إسرائيل. بالتالي كيف تصف الوضع هذا، خاصة ونحن نتحدث أنه بتنا في الشهر السابع لهذه الحرب؟
Well, I think probably each day seems to be worse than the one before. And today, for example, there's no aid distribution going on in the southern part of Gaza, the Rafah area, as a result of the closing of the two crossing points, Rafah and Kiryat Shalom, and the difficulty of internal distribution because of insecurity, the battles. So you have 800,000 people displaced, which is a huge number, and no aid. Our warehouses, we cannot reach them in the south, in Rafah. The fuel doesn't come in. So it's as bad as it can get at the moment. We're talking in detail every day with the Israelis, with the help of the Americans, about how to get safe distribution inside Gaza. There is some aid coming in through the north, through the Eretz crossing, and that's very, very important. Some aid has come in from the sea through this floating pier, but then most of it got looted on the way to the warehouse, taken away by people who understandably will do that, given the lack of food available to them.
ولكن حتى مع هذه المحاولة سواء في الشمال أو من خلال الرصيف العائم، هل هو كافي لتغطية حجم الأزمة والمأساة حقيقة؟
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Do you remember right at the beginning of this appalling conflict, we talked about the need for about 500 trucks of aid a day just to come in, and then the problem with distribution starts. Now, we've had a total of half a dozen trucks eventually from the beach, from the floating pier, reaching the warehouse in the first 2 days. But the first couple of days, last couple of days, we haven't been able to do even that. We've got about 50 going in on an average day in the north, which is helpful for aid for the people in the north, where famine, as you know, is looming. But it's not enough. And fuel is the kicker here, because without fuel, you can't move. Now, the fact that the aid program is now ground to a halt is bad enough, but it's almost impossible to imagine the trauma of those 800,000 people who've moved for what, 3 or 4 times, 5 times. They don't know what's going to happen next. There's no aid reaching them, or very little, wherever they are, whether they're on the beach or elsewhere. Hospital up in the north of Gaza came under attack yesterday, and everybody had to be evacuated. It's spiraling to a level of violence and conflict, which even in the Gazan conflict we haven't seen before.
كنت قد أشرت لجانب من الاتصالات مع الجانب الإسرائيلي والأمريكي في الفترة الأخيرة. يعني لو تحدثنا أكثر عن طبيعة هذه الاتصالات وأين وصلت من أجل تذليل العقبات القائمة داخل القطاع فيما يتعلق بالمهمات الإنسانية والمساعدات الإنسانية.
Well, it's in this bleak picture that I've been describing, it's very welcome to the fact that in the last day or two we've been having very constructive discussions with the Israeli mechanism that deals with us, also with the Israeli Southern Command, as well as the United States, because of course the US is involved because of the pier. So we've been talking about how to find safe routes, how to make sure that our movements are notified so that nobody attacks convoys that move, how to make sure that we have enough fuel. So those conversations have been improving. They're not new issues. We've been talking about these issues since the beginning, since November and even back into October. But they've got a new life in the last day or two, and I just hope that produces the goods. Because we need the pier to come back on stream. We need Kereshnom and Rafah to be opened for fuel as well as aid. And we need the Ashdod-Eretz pipeline to increase. And that's before we even talk about the West Bank and the Jordanian aid coming in. So we know what we need in terms of humanitarian aid. It's not rocket science, and it's been talked about for months. We simply need it to be done.
إذا تلقيتم إشارات إيجابية من الإسرائيليين يمكن القول؟ ماذا عن الضمانات الأمريكية؟ هل هناك أيضا شيء في هذا الأفق؟
Well, the US is really keen, of course, and always has been, and has been very much involved with us in negotiations right since the outset of the conflict. Keen to get aid moving. Well, who wouldn't want to get aid moving, frankly? We have been asking for much more effective contact with Israeli defense forces than we've had conventionally in this conflict, and that seems to be now beginning to happen, because in Gaza, as in any conflict, it's essential that humanitarian agencies are in touch with the militaries of all sides, in order to make sure that we both understand each other and our needs, and that we're not attacked and we deliver aid. So there is a little window here for these conversations to be practical, to be immediate, and to deliver the goods. So I'm not holding my breath, but there was a moment yesterday where we were beginning to think this might lead to some improvements.
ولكن لافت في هذه الحرب يعني أكثر ربما من غيرها من كل الحروب أنه حتى الأمم المتحدة على ما يبدو وكأنها مستهدفة. أعضاء الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الإغاثية والإنسانية داخل القطاع استهدفوا وكانوا ضحايا من ضحايا هذه الحرب بشكل إجمالي. هل ترون أن الأمم المتحدة مستهدفة خلال هذه الحرب على غزة من قبل إسرائيل وخاصة الأونروا وما حدث مع الأونروا؟
Especially UNRWA. UNRWA's people, what is it, just shy of 200 have been killed. Its premises, both in Jerusalem as well as in Gaza, have been attacked. It's been accused and accused and accused of bias, of lacking neutrality, and we know that's not true because the Secretary General commissioned a report on this by Catherine Colonna, the former French Foreign Minister, which said UNRWA is indeed doing the job that it was set up for. Targeting aid workers is the easiest and worst thing to do. And it's not only in Gaza this happens, but Gaza is particularly a horrendous record on this. Journalists also, of course, as you know, have been killed. And thirdly, health centers, hospitals, clinics have been targeted, particularly in Gaza. But we see this also in Sudan and elsewhere. But Gaza seems to be a place where all the negative, dangerous, threatening, illegal elements of the consequences of war come together to prevent the people there from a chance for survival. We have terrible figures of people who've been killed, over 35,000. It's an astonishing number in such a short time. And we don't know how many more are under the rubble, of course. We see very clearly now that the battle is not by a long way over. So we think it's going to get worse. So under these circumstances, what is essential is at least protect humanitarian aid. Don't kill aid workers, whether UN or not. Don't kill journalists. Let's get the story out. Be accountable under humanitarian law for protecting civilians and providing them with safety. And then finally give the Palestinian people a hope that this is not going to be the forever war.
ولكن يعني تم حتى بالنسبة لمسؤولين كبار في الأمم المتحدة تم منعهم من دخول إسرائيل، يعني بما فيهم حضرتك، يعني لم يتم إعطائك الفيزا على ما أعتقد في وقت سابق. لدخول إسرائيل. بداية هذا مؤشر على ماذا؟ ما الذي يخشونه؟ ما الذي يخبئونه هناك؟ وهذا أيضا يطرح تساؤلات أخرى. كيف توثقون الوضع داخل غزة الحقيقي والأرقام أيضا، خاصة أنه إسرائيل دائما ما تسعى أنه للطعن في الأرقام المقدمة من داخل غزة على أساس أنه حماس هي اللي تقدمها وبالتالي تبالغ فيها وفي الأرقام المقدمة.
Well, first of all, the fact that I can't go is not a serious problem because we have some really good people on the ground throughout all the agencies and NGOs. We also have a humanitarian coordinator, Mohammed Hadi, who is Jerusalem-based but always in Gaza. We have a senior humanitarian coordinator, Sigrid Kach, and so forth. So we have many, many contacts with all sides. The truth is that those statistics, which have become the subject of some controversy recently, look, this is a war zone. Gathering data in a war zone, you know it very well because you're in that same business, is incredibly difficult. The fact that we are re-verifying the precise statistics and details of those killed or wounded should tell everybody, including Israel, that we're very careful about this. We always source material and say what the sources are, and we've done this way before this conflict started. We've always used the ministries of health in Gaza as a source of information. It's not new, and we continue to do so in this conflict, and we're pretty confident that the numbers are as horrific as they are. But let's not forget, we don't know who's under the rubble. We're collecting data in a war zone where there are other things to do which are more important than data. But I don't think there's any question of the general truth, which is that the number of displaced is massive, 800,000 in the last 10 days. It's astonishing. And the number of deaths is tragic. And then we have the likelihood, I would not say the possibility, but the likelihood of famine. Now, famine is different from hunger, is different from disease. Famine kills with viral speed, and famine arrives mostly in the form of hunger, but also in the form of disease, and it kills children first.
Are we close to this?
We're very close. We look to have specific indicators by the end of May, which will verify once again, very technically, very carefully, whether famine itself is there or not. Usually, globally, the actual time of an announcement, yes, this is famine, by this technical committee, is already too late for most people. So kind of don't wait for the moment where there would be the bell rung saying this is famine. Kids are dying of hunger already. Kids are dying of malnutrition already. Hospitals don't have supplies, it's not surprising. Food, as we have been discussing, ain't there. What do you expect? You get exactly what you think, which is mass deaths in a place like Gaza, which is also a place of such misery. And, you know, the people of Gaza are quite remarkable. I can't imagine the trauma that they've gone through and the way that families have kept together, have moved with their children, with the fewer and fewer belongings. It's an incredible testimony to the power of humanity, even in these worst of conditions. God bless them.
يعني لا شك أنه تابعت خلال الفترة الماضية توجه المحكمة الجنائية الدولية لإصدار مذكرة توقيف بحق نتنياهو، جالانت، وأيضا 3 من قادة حماس. برأيك هل هذا يؤمن أو يضمن مسألة المساءلة والمحاسبة على ما يحدث في غزة حاليا من يعني أمور مروعة حقيقة؟
Well, you know, I would start by saying this is not my business. It's the business of lawyers. It's the business of the court, of the International Criminal Court. And it's independent, of course, of the rest of us who are just trying to get aid to people. But law is blind, and I'm a lawyer myself. It doesn't distinguish between people who do greater or lesser things. It seeks to provide accountability. Now, I would simply say this, and I won't comment on the ICC process, it's not my business, but for humanitarian agencies, having accountability for the breaches of humanitarian law is very important. My colleague, Dr. Tedros, who runs the World Health Organization, has been very vocal, not just in the case of Gaza, but in other places, Ukraine, Sudan, elsewhere, about attacks on health institutions, for example, which are prohibited by international humanitarian law. The International Red Cross has also been very vocal, as you know. So defeating impunity, attacks on our workers, attacks on our premises, attacks on our aid, it's really, really important.
لا أنا بطبيعة الحال أنا لم أسألك على هذا السؤال إلا فيما يتعلق لجانب المساءلة، فيما يتعلق أنه منظمات الإنسانية والإغاثية التابعة للأمم المتحدة بطبيعة الحال هي شاهد عيان في هذه الحرب، وأيضا لديها لديها من الوثائق ما يكفي في ضمان المساءلة والمحاسبة.
Well, our data is publicly available. And my office, in fact, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, produces much of this data and publishes it. And it's available to all, including lawyers, including government officials, including yourselves, the media. But we don't produce it for, the purpose of us producing that is not for the purpose of accountability, it's the purpose of our operations. Our colleagues in the High Commission for Human Rights, for example, are very, very much zeroing in on accountability. But for us and for me, through my life dealing with humanitarian aid, it's always been about getting aid to people without judging those, but always talking to and working with anybody who can either impede or protect humanitarian aid. So we make no distinction about people. We put the people first. And that's why we produce that data, but it is publicly accountable, publicly available.
هذا يجرني لنقاش آخر فيما يتعلق ربما بتصريحات سابقة لك أثارت جدل كبير على مستوى إسرائيل على أساس أن الأمم المتحدة لا تعتبر حماس جماعة إرهابية. ما زلت على رأيك في هذا الموقف؟ وهل هذا يعني أيضاً أن الأمم المتحدة والجهود الإنسانية والإغاثية تنسق مع حماس على أساس أنه لا تعتبرها جماعة إرهابية من أجل يعني توصيل وتوزيع المساعدات داخل غزة؟ هل تقومون بهذا؟
No, we're not. No, we're not. And I want to clarify, as I tried to at the time of that remark, it's simply a fact that the Security Council of the UN does not designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. It's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with the UN Secretariat. Just check the record. The fact is Hamas did acts of terror. There's no doubt on that October the 7th. And I've seen, as you have, the pictures of those days. They're appalling, absolutely shocking. So whether you're designated a terrorist organization or not is not particularly pertinent to the issue of whether you do bad things. And of course Hamas did terrible things on that day. Now, we do not distribute aid in Gaza with Hamas. We always, in Gaza, Sudan, Ukraine, anywhere else, we always distribute, Afghanistan, we distribute aid through our agencies. We talk to, in the case of Gaza, to the Israelis, obviously, because they have obligations under the law to provide security for our operations or to ensure security for our operations. But no, we are not working in partnership, if you like, with Hamas or with Israel, frankly, in delivering aid. We're working in partnership with our agencies and the brave people of international and national NGOs and civil society. They're the people we rely on.
طب دعني أسألك عن الصورة الأكبر والأشمل لغزة لليوم الذي يلي الحرب، لما هو متوقع وأي دور للأمم المتحدة في هذا السياق؟
I think it was most welcome that the Arab League in its meeting in Bahrain in recent days and then the declaration they put out from Manama talked about future arrangements for Palestinians, including in Gaza. And it was most welcome that they spoke about the plan for an international conference on this issue with the participation of and maybe the organization of the United Nations. That's what the UN was set up to do in 1945, was essentially about peace and security. So this is welcome. It's also very welcome that people are beginning to think in clear terms about that day after. But we know that there are very difficult issues that need to be resolved. For example, of course, we need to understand that Gaza needs to be governed by Palestinians. It's a Palestinian territory. We need to understand how security would be brought into Gaza as well as the West Bank. Gaza is a place of great lawlessness, of course, at the moment as we see it, and it's completely understandable. There's a huge amount of criminality in Gaza because people are desperate. So there needs to be a restoration of law and order. Who's going to do that? It's not clear. There's some talk about UN peacekeepers. I've had some experience of UN peacekeeping. This requires a Security Council mandate. I'm not sure that that's going to be immediately forthcoming. So there's got to be security. We need to have a Palestinian governance which is real, which can deliver. And then we need, which I think is where we can play an important role, is the delivery of humanitarian and then reconstruction aid. So you need three elements. You need aid, you need governance, you need security. I think it's great that the Arab League is really pushing this forward now. I know that the United Arab Emirates, where we are for this discussion, is very active on this, and I've had discussions here with senior officials about this. This is good. Thinking ahead is essential.
لكن ماذا عن الشركاء؟
You need a partner.
هل من شريك؟
Palestinian Authority
والإسرائيلي.
and the Israelis. Well, the Israelis, of course, are having their political discussions about what their role would be. It's going to be really important to find out by June the 8th or whatever what that's going to look like. It's essential that the US plays an important, and is playing an important role in ensuring this. Of course, we believe that Gaza should be managed and run by and governed by Palestinians, as it was, as it should be, as it will be. And we need to understand exactly what's asked of the United Nations in terms of these three things. We know aid is somewhere we can help, but will we be able to help with the rest? It's a discussion. But it's an important discussion. And if I may just add one point to it, which is that I know I've spent 50 years dealing with wars in all parts of the world, and one of the first casualties of war, and you see it everywhere, but you see it in Gaza, is the disappearance of hope. Hope is what gets people to work hard to survive and to protect their families. If you don't have hope, if you don't know what's going to happen after this immediate battle, you're weakened and your resilience is reduced. What happened in Bahrain is the beginning of hope, in my view.
ونتحول الآن لموضوع السودان، يعني لابد وأن أسألك عنه، لا يمكن أن نفوت هذه المقابلة دون التطرق لها، خاصة مع تصاعد واحتدام المعارك أيضا في الفترة الأخيرة ولا سيما في منطقة الفاشن. كيف تقيمون الوضع هناك وما هي أبرز الجهود من أجل تخفيف وطأة الأزمة الإنسانية هناك؟
I think Sudan is, it's kind of improper to compare places of great tragedy and need, but Sudan is really, really, really alarming. 5 million people at risk of famine. I mean, the numbers are just huge. Destabilizing the region beyond Sudan. The battle for al-Fasher is a terrible, terrible prospect. We've seen reports of attacks on hospitals and internally displaced camps already in al-Fasher before it's really even got going. We've had extremely detailed discussions with all of the militaries involved in that particular battle to identify areas where civilians should be safe and protected, even if there is a battle, which of course we would rather not happen. The US has been very actively trying to pursue the idea of a short ceasefire to enable civilians to get out of the way. We want to be able to deliver aid from Chad across the border safely into Darfur. We want to be able to reach Khartoum and Omdurman with aid, where these extraordinarily brave civil society organizations of the Sudanese are still present, still, there trying to get aid to their neighborhoods. Sudan is a place where we have enormous difficulty, even just negotiating access. We've wanted the Jeddah process to restart for months. We're told it may restart in June. I sure hope so, because that brings the two parties together. We know that there was a meeting in the margins of the Bahrain-Manama meeting of the parties. That's good. They have to deliver. They signed declarations, so-called Jeddah declarations, back in the early days of the war, confirming their responsibilities under humanitarian law. Well, I'd like to see that made flesh, and we need to have them sitting in front of us and in front of each other to say, okay, let's allow that convoy through. Let's allow that aid coming in from Chad. Let's allow civilians to escape battles. And then after all that, let's have some political diplomacy to end this mad, unnecessary war.
إذن وكيل الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة للشؤون الإنسانية مارتن غريفيث، شكرا جزيلا لك.
Thank you very much.
شكرا لكم جزيلا متابعينا، وإلى اللقاء.